Welcome back to Blender Daily. In today's tutorial, I'm gonna show you how simple it can be to create awesome looking 3D scans with just your smartphone. To do so, we are going to use the KIRI Engine. KIRI Engine is a mobile app for both iOS and Android and can also be accessed through an online platform. It allows us to take lots of photos of an object and then turn it into a fully textured 3D mesh. The photos can be taken either directly with the smartphone, or you also have the possibility to use a DSLR or any other camera. The process is surprisingly easy and works extremely well. In this video, I'm gonna give you a step-by-step guide on how to use the KIRI Engine and what you need to consider to get the best results possible. And in the end, I'm also gonna share how you can make money just by scanning 3D objects with your smartphone. But now, let's get started with the tutorial. Before we start the scanning process, we need to select an object that we want to scan. Here we already need to make a few considerations, since not every item is suitable for 3D scanning. Most importantly, we need to avoid anything that has transparent materials or that is extremely reflective. To get the best results, the surface of the object should have a lot of structure. That's why I chose a pumpkin and a pineapple as examples to demonstrate the scanning process in this tutorial. Almost as important as the object itself is the environment where we want to scan. Try to get as even lighting as possible and avoid any harsh shadows. If you are scanning outdoors, an overcast sky is perfect. Also try to keep the background as still as possible and avoid moving people or objects in the image. With an object and location selected, it is time to start taking the photos. Open the app and click on the plus button in the middle to open the camera. Then just start taking pictures from all around your subject. Try to cover lots of angles and perspectives to give the algorithm as much information to work with as possible. With simple objects like the pumpkin for example, we can usually get great results with around 50 to 70 images. More detailed or bigger objects also need more photos. However, I generally recommend you to take the time and capture more images than you might think are necessary. KIRI Engine allows you to take up to 200 photos per scan. Once you have enough images, you can go on to the processing settings. Here we have a few options to customize before the photos are turned into a 3D model. First of all, we can give the scan a name. If you want to, you can store all the images you've taken on the device, which would allow you to reprocess the scan again later on with different settings. Since this uses a lot of memory and I know that I probably won't need to process again, I usually leave this turned off. In the next segment, we have the option to adjust the density of the mesh and the quality of the texture. If you want to get a really light file and don't need an extremely detailed mesh, you can bring this to medium or even low. I always leave the settings on high though, since I'll be able to decrease the density and resolution later on in Blender anyways, if I really need to. Then we also have a bunch of file formats to choose from. Since I want to export the result to Blender, I'm going to use OBJ. This should also work for most other 3D applications. AI object masking is a really cool feature that I'll explain later on in this tutorial. For now, we can leave it turned off. Finally, give it a label to categorize the scan and click on upload. This will upload all the photos to a cloud server where the scan gets processed. This has the advantage that the KIRI Engine isn't dependent on the performance of your phone and can even be used on older devices without any issues. All the heavy calculations are offloaded to a much more powerful server. Once everything is uploaded, the scan starts processing in the background. You'll get notified once the 3D object is ready, which usually happens within less than 10 minutes. The result can then be directly previewed from within the KIRI Engine app. This already worked really well and delivered great results as you can see. However, this method has one big drawback. We are missing the bottom part of our object. Luckily, there is another scanning method available that helps us get around this issue. We're going to do almost everything exactly the same as in the previous scan, but this time we'll keep the camera approximately stationary and only move the object instead. Also try to keep the background as clean and stationary as possible for the best results. This allows us to capture every side of the object and also leads to evenly spread lighting, which both helps us to get better results. In the processing settings, we are going to do everything the same as previously. The only difference is that we need to enable AI object masking. Then click on Upload and wait for the magic to happen. As you can see, this time we get this awesome complete scan of the pumpkin without any missing parts. I think this is a really powerful feature. KIRI Engine doesn't just work on your phone, but you can also access it from any web browser. This allows us to upload images that weren't taken with a smartphone, but for example with a DSLR to get better quality photos and even more detail. The whole process and settings are exactly the same to what I just showed you in the mobile app. Here's the result that I got from scanning with a camera. In this part, I want to show you how you can quickly improve the scan 3D model within Blender. I'll try to keep this part as simple as possible to make sure everyone is able to follow along, even if you've never used Blender before. If you are already familiar with Blender and are interested in a more sophisticated method to improve your mesh, I recommend you to check out this short tutorial by Peter France. Blender is a 100% free and open source 3D software. So if you don't have it installed already, you can download it for free from blender.org. Then we also need to download the actual scan. For this, go back to the web version of KIRI Engine, select the model and within the 3D viewer click on the download button. You can also export the scan directly from within the mobile app if you want to. Once you open up Blender, you're going to be presented with this default startup file. Now we don't need any of those objects, so let's select all of them and press X to delete them. Instead, we want to bring in our 3D scanned object. To do so, go up to File, Import and choose the Wavefront OBJ option. Then locate the folder that we just downloaded and select the 3dmodel.obj file and click on Import Wavefront OBJ. Now to navigate in the 3D viewport, you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, use the middle mouse button to rotate around, and hold down Shift while using the middle mouse button to move the view. Alternatively, you can also use the buttons up here, so the magnifying glass to zoom in, the hand to move the view around, and this gizmo to rotate. Now, first of all, we want to bring the pumpkin to the center of our scene. To do so, simply right click and under Set Origin, choose Geometry to Origin, which is going to bring it to the center of the scene. Then let's also fix the scale of this object. So if you press N, you're going to open up the side panel and under dimensions, you can see the size of this object. So currently this pumpkin is 3.5 meters in size, which is way too big. So let's press S to scale it down. And I think around 20 centimeters would be a realistic scale for this object. So let's go down even more until we're around 0.2 meters in size. Then let's also adjust the rotation of the pumpkin. So for this, I'm going to press the number 3 on my numpad to get into side view. Or alternatively, you can also use the gizmo up here in order to get to an orthographic side view. Then rotate the pumpkin so that it is facing upwards. Then go to the front view. Rotate it as well. And then I also want to press G to move it upwards and place it on this ground plane. Once you are done with rotating and scaling, I recommend you to apply those transformations. To do so, select pumpkin, press Ctrl A and apply the rotation and the scale. If you forget to do this, you might run into some issues later on when using the model. Currently, we can only see the mesh itself, but the texture is missing. So in order to see the texture, we need to switch to Material Preview, which we can do up here. And now you can also see the colors of the pumpkin. And whenever you switch to Material Preview, I also recommend you to enable Ambient Occlusion and Screen Space Reflections. Next, let's also take a look at the density of this mesh. For this, go to the Viewport Overlays and enable the wireframe. And you can see that the mesh is currently really dense. This is way too much detail for a small object like a pumpkin. So let's fix this by going to the modifier properties and let's add in a decimate modifier. Down here you can see that this object currently has more than 250,000 faces, which is way too much and it's going to make it really hard to work with this object. So to improve this, we can play around with this ratio, and if I for example bring this down to 0.5, you can see that this reduces the face count to only around 125,000 faces, which is still way too dense. So I think we can go lower to maybe 0.1. Now we're down to 25,000 faces. However, I think we can go even further. So let's try 0.05. We still have more than enough detail. You can see the difference if I turn off the wireframe. And now I toggle the decimate modifier off and on again. And you can see that we only have minimal differences while reducing the number of faces by a factor of 20. Once you're happy with the decimation, open up this drop-down menu and apply the changes. If we now go back to viewport shading, you can see that we get all those harsh edges on the faces. In order to fix this, simply right-click and enable Shade Smooth, which will make it look a bit better. Then let's go back to Material Preview. And I think we can improve the texture of this object a bit more. To do so, we need to open up a material editor. So go to the corner of the 3D viewport until the cursor turns into this plus icon, and then simply drag to the side to open up a new window. Then switch this to a shader editor, and in here you can see the current node setup of our material. First of all, I want to reset this shader, so let's select the principal BSDF node and press backspace to reset all the values. First of all, let's adjust the reflectiveness of our object. To do so, we need to use this roughness value. So if I bring this to a value of 0, you can see everything becomes really glossy. And if I bring this all the way up, we don't get any reflections at all. Now we don't want this value to be the same all over the pumpkin. So in order to achieve this, we can use the image texture to drive the roughness. For this, take the color output of the image texture node and plug it into the roughness input. Now the darker parts of the pumpkin are more reflective than the brighter parts. Currently this is a bit too strong. So let's go back to the material editor, press Shift A. And on the converter, add in a color ramp node. Then bring this in between the color and the roughness. And in order to decrease the effect of this, simply take this black color and make it a bit brighter. It is still too strong, so let's make it even brighter until you get something that looks realistic for the material that you are trying to create. Those values can be different for each object that you've scanned. So now we fixed the reflectiveness, however the surface of our object is really flat and we don't really have any detail. So we can fix this as well by going back to the material editor, press Shift A and under vector add in a bump node. Then plug the normal into the normal input of our shader and again use the color output for the height of the bump. This adds a lot of extra detail to our object, however this is currently way too strong. So let's bring this down. First of all, adjust the distance, let's say 0.1, which is still too much, so let's try 0.05 and then also bring the strength down quite a bit, until we get just a very subtle effect. And I think this is still a bit too strong. So I'm gonna continue to play with the strength and the height values until I get something that I think is realistic for a pumpkin. You can clearly see the difference in those highlights. So if I turn this off, you can see what we had before. And this is what we get if we add those extra details. So that's how simple it can be to improve the quality of your model within Blender. And last of all, let's also rename our object. So go up to the outliner, double click on the 3D model, and I'm gonna call this pumpkin. Alright, so in this part I want to show you how to create a nice turntable animation in order to present your 3D scanned models in a pleasing way. For this, first of all, we want to create a little object that we can place the pumpkin on top of. For this, let's press Shift A to add in a new object, and under Mesh I'm gonna choose the circle. Then let's open up this drop down menu in the bottom left corner and increase the resolution to 64 vertices. Then let's press S to scale it down and bring it approximately to the size of our pumpkin. Now in order to edit the mesh, we need to switch to edit mode, so up here switch it from object to edit mode. Then with all the vertices selected, press F to fill it with a face and then E to extrude it upwards. Now we can go back to object mode. And currently, as you can see, we get this really sharp edge around our object, which we don't really want. So to fix this, go to the modifier properties and add in a bevel modifier. Currently this is too strong, so let's bring down the amount. So get this small bevel, and if we increase the number of segments, we can turn this into a smooth edge. Now to make this even cleaner, let's right click with the object selected and choose Shade Smooth. Alright, so our first object is now ready. So let's place the pumpkin on top of it. So select it and press G to move it around, and then Z to constrain it to the Z axis. Next, let's add in a studio background. So let's press Shift A again to bring in a new object, and this time it's gonna be a plane. It is also a bit too big, so let's press S to scale it down. And again switch to edit mode in order to edit the mesh. Then we want to select those two vertices in the back and press E to extrude them. We want to extrude them upwards, so again press Z to constrain it to the Z axis. Move it up quite a bit and we can already leave edit mode and go back to object mode. So we get this studio background, however we have this hard edge that we don't need. So again, we're going to work with a bevel modifier. This time increase the amount and also increase the number of segments and right click to enable smooth shading. Alright, so our basic scene is ready. Next we need to bring in a camera object. So let's press Shift A and bring in a camera. Then I want to press N to open up the side panel. And right here, I'm gonna move it back on the Y axis. Then let's quickly reset the rotation. Maybe press S to scale it down so it is a bit easier to work with. Then I wanna move it up on the Z axis a bit. Let's also rotate it on the Z axis for 180 degrees. And then also on the X axis so that it is pointing towards the pumpkin. Now in order to get inside of the camera, you can either press 0 on the numpad, or if you don't have a numpad on your keyboard, you can also click on this button right here. And you can see that we need to rotate the camera even more. So let's play with this X rotation until it is pointing towards the pumpkin. Currently we are still in material preview, and this isn't exactly what it's gonna look like once we render it out. So in order to switch to render preview, click on this button right here, and you can see that everything becomes really dark because we don't have any lights in our scene. So let's fix this by pressing Shift A and then under light add in an area light. Press G and Z to move it upwards. And whenever I use a light object, I also want to go to the light properties and under shadow enable contact shadows to make it a bit more realistic. You can see the difference. This is without the contact shadows and this is with. Let's press S to scale this first light a bit down. And then I want to bring it behind the pumpkin. So G and Y to move it back here. And then let's rotate it. So R and then X to rotate it on the X axis so that it is pointing towards the pumpkin. Then we also want to have a light in front of the pumpkin. So with it selected, press Shift D to duplicate it and then Y to move it in front. Let's also rotate it on the X axis. Maybe G and Z to move it down. Again, rotate on the X axis. Then I'm gonna go to top view and place it a bit on the side of the camera and rotate it towards the pumpkin again. Let's take a look at this from the camera view. And I think I also want to add a little light on the left side of the pumpkin. So let's go back into top view. And with the light selected, again Shift D to duplicate it. Bring it all the way over here. And then R to rotate. I think I want to bring this down even more. So G and Z. And then rotate it on the Y axis. Depending on your scene, you might also need to adjust the intensity of those lights. To do so, simply select it and then adjust this power value in the light properties. So in this case, I think I'm gonna make this left light a bit weaker to power of 6 and maybe make this one in front a bit stronger. So I'm gonna bring it up to 12. So let's go back to the camera view. And I think this looks pretty good. So the next thing I also want to do is adjust the color of our background. So let's select the background object, then go to the material properties and click on this plus to create a new material. And down here under the base color, we can adjust the color of it. And I think I'm gonna give this a slight yellow or orange that should match with the pumpkin. I also want this other object to have the same material, so I'm gonna select it, go to the material properties, and from the drop down menu, I'm gonna select the material that we just created. So our scene setup is now basically done, and we are only left to do the animation. And instead of animating the camera to go around our object, it is a lot easier to just take the object instead and rotate it on its own axis. To get a perfect loop in our animation, we want to set the first keyframe on frame 0. So let's go to frame 0, select the pumpkin and press I to add a keyframe and select the rotation channel. Then go forward to the last frame. In this case, I'm going to make the animation 150 frames long. So I'm also going to set the end frame to 150. And then let's press N to open up the side panel and rotate the object on the Z axis. I'm gonna rotate it by 360 degrees, which is one full turn. Then press I again and add another rotation keyframe. When I now press spacebar to play the animation, you can see that the pumpkin starts turning around. However, the problem is that it slows down in the end of the animation and starts to speed up again. Instead, we want the pumpkin to have a constant speed throughout the whole animation. To fix this, select both of the keyframes and while hovering over the timeline, press T and change the interpolation to linear. When we now play it, the pumpkin should always have the same speed while rotating. And with the animation done as well, we are now ready to render this out. For this, let's switch to the rendering workspace. And in order to render out a single frame, go up to render and choose render image. So you can see this is what it's gonna look like. And I think we could add a bit more contrast to this. So let's go to the color management and adjust the look from none to, let's say, high contrast or medium high contrast. Now in order to export this as a video file, we also need to go to the output properties and change the file format from PNG to FFmpeg video. Then under the encoding settings we want to choose the MP4 preset and change the quality from medium to perceptually lossless. Then lastly, we also need to define an output location, so let's click on this folder icon, go to wherever you want to save it and give it a file name. Click on accept, and in order to render this out, go up to render and choose render animation, which is going to export it as a video file. The KIRI Engine app is free to use. However, there is also a paid premium version which will give you some advantages. For example, the premium version allows you to export as many scans as you want to, while the free version is limited to 3 exports per week. It also gives you the possibility to take up to 200 pictures per scan. The free version is limited to 70 images. This might not sound like much, however in lots of situations this is already more than enough. To demonstrate this, I made the scan right here where I used no more than 70 pictures and still got a high quality result with lots of details. And lastly, the web version is only partly available for free users. Everyone can preview and download their models from the browser, but only premium users can upload and process scans directly from the web version. All of this comes at a price of just $60 per year, which I think is really fair. This is just $5 per month, which will give you access to an unlimited number of scans and all those other amazing features. The best thing about KIRI Engine is that it is constantly updated and new features are coming out all the time. The team sent me a list with all the upcoming features they are currently working on. Model cropping. This gives us the possibility to perform plain cuts in-app to delete any unwanted parts of a 3D scan. The software can even automatically fill in holes after the cut to make the model complete. Advanced camera settings. This allows us to manually set up the camera parameters to achieve the best possible captures. The adjustable parameters include ISO, shutter speed, exposure value, white balance and many more. Texture enhancement. This allows you to enhance the texture quality of the 3D model within the app. This will make the texture richer and more detailed. You can choose between manual and auto texture enhancement. Image rendering. This feature gives us the possibility to render the 3D scan with the new cloud rendering engine. We can use our 3D scans in a variety of previously created scenes. Since it is rendered out on the cloud, it should deliver great results really fast. KIRI is also working on a creator program that will allow you to make money from your 3D scans. They want to build a library with high quality scans for VFX and CGI artists. So if your scan fits within their standards and criteria, they are willing to buy it directly from you. I think this will be a really interesting opportunity. If you are interested in KIRI Engine and 3D scanning in general, I recommend you to join their Discord server. Not only will this allow you to connect with like-minded people and ask questions, but you can also take part in giveaway contests where you can win stuff like 3D printers, VR headsets, gift cards and so on. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and you could learn something new. And if you have any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I am Nick from Blender Daily. See you in the next one.